We are a little over halfway through the 2022 season, and we are going to take a look at our rookie rankings. Lots of moving up, lots of moving down. This is the Dynasty Newsletter brought to you by Footballguys.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co host, Chris Allen. Chris, we've got a lot of rookie movement from going through the year. We've had injuries, especially Brees Hall, our consensus 101, and that really shakes things up at the top. So let's just kind of go through our rankings and just make sure we hit on all of these top rookies, like maybe like the top 12, and just talk about if they moved up, why did they move up? Why did they move down? What did we react to? What kind of didn't we react to? And I guess let's start with, like I said, Brees Hall. I mean, that was both of our 101, right? So what do you do with Brees Hall going forward from is he the top player in his class anymore to is he the top running back in the NFL?
I don't know about top running back in the NFL. At least of their generation, like makes it seem like they're so old or whatever. But it's like if you compare,
With running backs, you get like 2-year generations.
pretty much that's what I'm saying. It's like it does it like because Christian McCaffrey is like obviously like from a dynasty standpoint is probably on like the higher end of the running back spectrum, but it's so
Mhm.
hard to compare his value and what his value is to dynasty and what his value would be to a specific team, right? Because you'd want him to be
Sure.
on a contender versus guys like Brees Hall, Kenneth Walker. Like I mean, not even those guys like the rookies coming out, but if you want to throw in like DeAndre Swift, I mean, those types of guys like into that bucket of the guys like more on the younger side. Okay, fine. But for at least the two rookies that we considered to be of note, like from this particular class, Kenneth Walker, Brees Hall. Uh, Kenneth Walker, I think he is, at least at this point, and this is more because of the tiebreaker because of health. Like he's the one that I guess flips in the rankings just because we've
Mhm.
seen the level of explosiveness. We've seen how well the Seahawks offensive line like has been able to be rebuilt like in just a short off season. The level of rapport that he's been able to connect with Geno Smith and the rest of the offense so far. We've seen the explosiveness like from Kenneth Walker. We just saw him do it like in their comeback effort against the Raiders just yesterday. I think all of that goes to show like what the projected workload is going to be for Kenneth Walker like moving forward. I'm not assuming that Penny is still going to be in the picture for next season, and not to say that
Should
Travis
be a
Homer,
free agent.
right, he should be a free agent. I don't expect Seattle to retain him, but it's not to say that Travis Homer, DJ Dallas are ones to compete for even 30% of the workload like in the coming
Right.
years. I'm assuming they pick up somebody, let's say like a day 2-ish, day 3, early day
Like a
3 like
Raheem Mostert or something. They've got a lot of older guys available this free agent class.
exactly. So I could see them signing somebody that, of course, every time that a team signs like some well-known free agent, everybody's going to be like, "Oh my gosh, like what's that going to do to his dynasty value?" Yeah, it's the same thing. Well, I guess it actually worked out because remember when everybody started freaking out, like, "Oh, Jamal Williams got signed by the Lions. That's going to be
Yeah.
terrible for DeAndre Swift's value," and everyone just kind of scoffed at it, and then it actually happened. But in this
Yeah, but it
case,
was mostly like it's injuries for DeAndre
I do
Swift.
think
Like,
it's injuries, and there of course there is some vision concerns with Swift. I mean, you and I can have had those conversations, like in the
yeah, that's been tough. That's been
it's been
frustrating
it
recently.
definitely has been like kind of frustrating to see Swift like not to hit the hole like when you expect him to. But between him and Brees Hall, I would say again, just for injuries, just for the injury standpoint, it's easier to put your chip like on Kenneth Walker, even though we know that the arrow is pointing up for the Jets. To say that they're a quarterback away, that's not too crazy to say because even before Elijah Vera Tucker like got hurt, before we saw a couple of injuries on along there to the Jets defense as well. I mean, they were playing like fairly well, and we can expect to see like reinforcements coming in 2023, so that if they do wind up getting one of the quarterbacks from this upcoming class, hey, like this could be like a solid unit moving forward. So again, I think it's more like Kenneth Walker for me. But then, I mean, Brees Hall again, just because we want to see like how well he responds to the offseason treatment on his road to recovery. But either way, it's a close second, like between Walker and Brees Hall.
So that's the big conversation with the running backs in the 102 101 debate going into the season was mostly Brees Hall and Kenneth Walker. I know myself and a bunch of other people had a wide receiver at 102, but not necessarily a consensus. There were a bunch of guys that threw their hat in. For me, Breece Hall falls behind Kenneth Walker just a little, even though I do believe that Breece Hall is like the quote-unquote more talented back of the two. Like you said, he's available now, and it's pretty much a coin flip between the guys, pretty much the same age. Both neither are going to have the 5th-year option, so there's no tiebreaker there. So in that sense, I mean, Breece Hall is definitely an exciting prospect and somebody that we should be trying to trade for if there's any sort of discount. But Kenneth Walker is available now, and he will get the volume, probably gets up to like the rare 70% touch share next year, which is really tough to get to in today's NFL. So unless they bring in like that free agent class is very loaded, but they're all older guys, some guys that struggle with injury. So I could definitely see like 80% even upside for Walker. And then when he gets into that range, like Najee Harris did as a rookie, it really doesn't matter how good the player is. So pair the fact that Kenneth Walker is a quality player, that helps a lot. But Kenneth Walker is actually not my 101. Garrett Wilson is in fact my 101 from this class. There's not really anything negative you can say about Garrett Wilson because we've got multiple sample sizes without Zach Wilson. So with Joe Flacco, he actually earlier in the season, he led the league at one point in target share, not number one, sorry, but like top 10 as a rookie, like week 1 through 3. And that was without Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson comes in and kind of simmers down, not to mention Corey Davis comes back, and that seemed to maybe negatively affect Garrett Wilson for a time. And we kind of slowed our roll on him. And then right back with Mike White, we get 2 touchdowns last week. I understand one was blown coverage, but Garrett Wilson has still looked phenomenal. So there's just nothing negative you can say about the guy that was already my wide receiver 1, already my 102 over Kenneth Walker, and just hasn't done anything negative to prove any otherwise. The only issue that I'm sure you'll get into in a moment is quarterback situation. And my rebuttal before you even get to it is it just has to not be Zach Wilson, and I think everything will be fine. So that puts Garrett Wilson at my 101.
Yeah, I don't think that there's no real pushback. It's just easier for me to look at like from a week to week volatility standpoint, because we can talk. I mean, of course, the conversation like throughout the offseason is just going to be littered with us. And by say like us, it's just like the entirety of the dynasty community saying like, oh, look at like the way that the team's projecting, and just the exact same things that I just said, right? It's going to be the Jets are going up, and pretty much all the other, but the like for the other situations, like Drake London, what are they going to be doing at quarterback? We haven't even seen anything from Desmond Ridder. Like, what's their quarterback situation going to look like moving forward? Like all this uncertainty. So like the community is going to go, like the flow is going to be that everything's pointing up for Garrett Wilson. But then once we get into the thick of it, right? Once we get into the actual season where Garrett Wilson's going to have to play against Buffalo twice, Bill Belichick twice, and then whatever the Dolphins like wind up doing, because they're looking like a pretty solid team too. I mean, they have to play them twice. I mean, it's just, so once we get into the actual like volatility of the season, that quarterback play is going to matter. So I'm just saying, like, for me, it's just easier for me to look at, oh, Kenneth Walker, oh, he's, getting a lot of work. Oh, also getting a few targets out of the backfield. Oh, I'll probably take him ahead of him. It's just like and Breece Hall on the exact same team, getting a larger share of the running back touches, and also he was earning targets before he went down. It's just, how does Breece Hall now, once he gets reintegrated into the offense, where was Garrett Wilson going to see the same volume of touches? Like once he gets there, I mean, the target share, like the total, like his targets divided by the number of attempts is probably going to remain the same, but does the total pie now just shrink? Right? Because the quarterback play changes, or they get like somebody new or something along those lines. Like that's my question. So it's just easier for me to look at the running back. And also, isn't Garrett, well, like, again, this is, we're nitpicking, or we're picking nits at this point. Isn't Garrett Wilson a little older for a prospect, like coming out? Not super older. Isn't he already
Not
like
enough
22?
not enough to consider, I don't think. Yeah, I think he's 22. I mean,
So it's just like,
I think
it's
that
little
23 is a
things.
little worrisome, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it
like,
is little
it's not
things.
like Calvin Ridley coming out, but it's just like,
Right, it was
I,
24.
yeah, it's like, just small little things here and there where it's just like, if I could get a running back at, who's getting the bulk of the touches, and then also a little bit younger, also involved in the passing game, so each of them like kind of check like most of those boxes. It's just like, oh, okay, well then, I'll at least look at those guys beforehand. But
Yeah,
again,
all fair
I'm not
points.
done with it.
Actually, and a good a good point you made is that Breece Hall actually probably was getting pretty close to Garrett Wilson's target share at one point during the season with Zach Wilson at quarterback. So yeah, because Garrett Wilson's target share dropped a little bit, and then Breece Hall had a couple of those like close to 10 target games, one game over 10 targets, I believe. So yeah, that's a pretty valid point. It depends how he comes back from injury, and then that's
Yeah.
just the tiebreaker for me in terms of wide receiver. I mean, having Garrett Wilson for years and years. Garrett Wilson's no Jamar Chase by any means, but to get that like wide receiver one, which I think Garrett Wilson could be on your team for years and not have to worry about it and not have to pay a lot to get him, because it was pretty easy to acquire like the 104 through the 108 this year.
Mhm.
So it didn't really take you a ton to get Garrett Wilson on your roster. But then we have another really tough decision here now that we're into the wide receivers. It was Treylon Burks. Actually, Treylon Burks was also in that 102 conversation for a lot of people. I'm pretty sure J Mike took him at 102 in one of our trade addicts leagues, actually.
Hmm.
But I I know that Treylon Burks entered the 102 chat, and then we also had Drake London entering the 102 chat. But actually, who I didn't have rated that high is Chris Olave, who I now have as my wide receiver too. So I've got Chris Olave ahead of Drake London and Treylon Burks at this point in the season. I don't know. Do you feel the same way in terms of those rankings?
I mean, for me personally, I would put Pickens ahead of Olave, but I
Ooh,
understand it's a close draw just because
they're all
again
really close.
they're all fairly close. I do think at some point that Pickens is going to wind up overtaking like Olave and I'm just looking at the total team situation. 100% agreed that right now, like through this is week 12 already, through like 3 months of the season, Olave at multiple points throughout the season has been top 10 in amongst all wide receivers in terms of air yards, uh, earning a massive target share just within his own offense. Now
Didn't he
that's
have
been
301 game this season?
that sounds right. Although
I
I'm
think
like,
he did.
yeah, but I would say some of those are probably prayer yards, like more so than air yards. I mean, but hey, man, I'm not gonna. Again, we're picking nits. We're picking nits. So but also we got to look at the context of Olave's situation. Michael Thomas hasn't played since like week 3. Jarvis Landry has been out for multiple
Yeah,
weeks.
but it didn't matter. It didn't
I'm
matter.
just saying, hey, just adding context to the situation, because if we were saying that we're Breece Hall's targets, we're taking away some from Garrett Wilson to start the season. Let's just add some context to Chris
Yeah,
Olave's
but
situation.
right. But so I do cutting through the noise once a week, where I take Dynasty's most polarizing player from our Dynasty Discord that we've got at Footballguys. So definitely sign up for that. One of the weeks I covered Chris Olave, and I went
Shameless
into it thinking, shameless plug. One of the weeks I went into it, or when I wrote that article, I went into it the exact same way. I basically started the article with "yeah, but," and I was expecting to see like, okay, but there's no Jarvis Landry, and there's been no Michael Thomas. But he's got 14 target games with Michael Thomas. He's got 14 target games with Jarvis Landry. He's got a 13 target game with both of them. So it really didn't seem to matter. And he succeeded with and without Andy Dalton. So I thought that I was going to find that it mattered. And that's how Chris Olave actually, I ended the article by saying, I think he's my wide receiver one, because I really felt like I was going to get him. Like I was like, yeah, those
Mhm.
air yards look nice, those highlights look nice, but I'm going to convince some people otherwise by the end of this. And I was like, I got myself here. Yeah, I mean, no, he just has been unaffected by anything except for referees this weekend when he clearly called that pass. But
Yeah,
um,
well, yeah.
yeah,
So maybe you convinced me, because I think at this point, Deontay Johnson should still continue to be a part of the offense. Like they got Najee Harris for at least another 2 seasons, if I'm remembering correctly. Because they still got.
he's a first rounder. They could have a 5th-year option on him.
Yeah, that's true. Whether or not they want to exercise that's a completely
Yeah, I
different
don't know if they're
story.
gonna. Why do you take running backs in the first round? Like, I feel like the only
Dude, that's a
reason you
whole
can justify.
that's a whole other thing, man. I don't
No,
know.
but I'm saying, but if you're gonna do it, the only way you could justify it is if you already plan on taking their 5th-year option. I could not imagine taking a running back in the first round and not giving the 5th-year option,
Dude,
because
like
you
the
could
Giants
almost
are gonna
always
have to
trade
make that
back.
same decision like here with the next
I know
4 months or something like that. Well, they're
that's
probably
gonna
already
be a
coming
very
this year.
expensive 5th year. Is the 5th-year option prorated with your draft pick, just like your contract is?
That's for
So
somebody much smarter than myself.
I think it has to be, which means that's gonna be an expensive. What was he, third overall?
That sounds
Yeah, I
right.
think because he was before the Browns' second pick. So the Browns had Baker, and then they took Denzel Ward with the fourth pick. That means Saquon was the third overall pick.
What
That's
was
going to
that,
be
17?
sounds right. So,
No, that
yeah.
was 18. 18.
Okay.
Second overall.
Saquon went second overall.
Baker, Saquon,
Wow.
Darnold.
Because the big debate was the Browns wanted Baker and Saquon. How are they going to get them both? And it was like, do you take Saquon first or do you take Baker first to get them both? And then turns out they took Denzel Ward anyways.
Yeah. I
Woof.
mean,
That's rough. That's going to be a very I'm pretty sure it is prorated based on your draft position, and that's going to be an expensive. They're probably going to try to re-sign him before they accept the 5th-year option because it's going to be so expensive.
that would be in their best interest, but I mean, we'll see if they wind up doing it.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see, what
Absolutely. But
$7 million
$7 million is his 5th-year option
for 2022. That's what his contract says on Spotrac.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So his 5th-year option is going to be more expensive than that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, that would be my guess. Yeah.
But I don't know why you would ever take a first-round running back if you're not going to take the 5th-year option. That just really doesn't make much sense. But anyways, back to Chris Olave being fantastic. Yeah, so Chris Olave is just the reason he is my wide receiver 2 is just because he's been like basically agnostic to any situation, like I was saying earlier. But the other guys have been like extremely agnostic to situation. The other 2 guys are Drake London and Treylon Burks, both fantastic options. Both I had ranked over Chris Olave prior to the season, and both have had their hardships. London's been healthy. He's been getting great target share. His catchable passes I thought would be worse. He's actually got like an okay amount of catchable balls thrown his way.
Mm-hmm.
So it really just doesn't. He and Pitts, I mean, they're both getting targets, and it's not happening. I don't really understand it, but you can't ignore it because we don't know when are the Falcons are surprisingly okay at football. So like, when are they going to be in a position to get a quality quarterback as well?
Yeah, and I think that's the problematic part is that like this is a team that's been predicated on the run. I mean, they are dead last in pass rate over expectation over the past few weeks.
Well,
So it's really like dead last in pass rate over expectation. I think Marcus Mariota is second highest just behind Tua in terms of play action rate and also in terms of average depth of target on play action. But most of those passes were like at least attempts were going towards Kyle Pitts or somebody downfield because it was like a massive ADOT like on those like almost 11 yards like per attempt on play action. So it's like unless Drake London is going to be the dude getting those, there almost has to be like some sort of shift in how London is deployed on the field. So while I think like talent wise, he's shown us like everything we expected to get out of him, like being able to run the right routes. I mean, being able to separate. I mean, all the stuff like he's showing everything that he showed on film when he was back in college. I think just the issue is it's just the schematic fit like within the offense. Well, not take that back. Schematic fit's like not the right word. He is the right schematic fit for the offense. It's just that the schematic fit isn't conducive to scoring fantasy points, and that's the irritating part.
Right. Like I think that Arthur Smith is plenty happy with what he's got in Drake London and Kyle Pitts. I don't think he's got any qualms with them, even though they're not putting up anything in the box score, because I think he's making their offense operate properly. You still have to respect Drake London and Kyle Pitts, knowing the type of players that they are, even if they are not like the focal point of the offense as they should be. I guess it really just comes down to one, Treylon Burks just had a rough go of it. Some things independent of himself, some things dependent on himself. Injury happens, but he had we don't really know if like the asthma was ever even a real thing or some of the other practice issues were ever a real thing. But then he got the injury and we didn't really know. And then he's done everything that you would have expected him to do since he came back. But then that's another situation where it's not really a passing offense that we like to attack. So we've got this big pool of awesome wide receivers in this class in terrible situations, still producing well. Like we don't have a single wide receiver from this class that is in a good passing situation because we can bring in. So we got you were getting to Pickens and why he was kind of ranked around your 2, and I do get that. I don't know if they're going to be in a position again to get a quarterback early enough. Maybe if they keep not quite producing this year, but I think Pickett gets 2 years, and that's going to be tough. But Hey, Pickens, I'm thinking I covered Showdown for this slate. I'm thinking that Pickens is probably going to end up taking over the wide receiver one role pretty soon here over Deontay Johnson. They've got the same targets over the last 2 weeks, which is good for Pickens, but that's a steep decline for Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson's jumping down from like 10 targets per game to like 5 over the last two. So Pickens and Deontay are pretty much sharing target share. So you might be a little you might be doing well being a little early on Pickens, especially if you value him there and anyone else listening values him there. It's probably a good time to trade for him because he got so much hype with like the pushing dudes on the ground, but I feel like it leveled out. It leveled out to a point where he's still like very affordable in trades, especially if you think he can rise to the occasion and be like the top wide receiver from this class, which would pretty much make him a perennial wide receiver one for at least a couple years, which is what I think Garrett Wilson should be. So I definitely get Pickens being ranked that high. That group of Olave, London, Burks, and Pickens, you could just flip around pretty much any way, and I would respect it. The next two is where things get very weird. But before that, let me tell you about the Footballguys newsletter coming straight to your inbox from Joe Bryant. It has contributions from Cecil Lammey and Sigmund Bloom. You'll get all the news and notes from around the league in one email. You also get injuries from our Dr. Gene Bramwell after the weekend, so you know what we can expect and how many games our guys are going to be missing. So you get all that. If you miss anything on Sunday, you have to step away from red zone. Any of that, you're not going to miss anything going into next week when you have to set your lineup. So go to footballguys.com and subscribe to the Football Guys newsletter, and then we take tidbits from the newsletter. Like this week, we had a bunch of rookies that produced, so we got to make this show around our rookie rankings. We'll take tidbits from that newsletter and then create the Dynasty newsletter for you. The next part is going to be very interesting because I've got Christian Watson in the same range as Romeo Doubs, but it's weird, right? It's been weeks since we've had to talk about Romeo Doubs. I feel like we had to talk about him for like 4 or 5 weeks straight.
God, yeah.
And now since he's been injured and Christian Watson has 6 touchdowns in the last 3 games, that is absurd on like a 15 or 17% target share. So Christian Watson doesn't get to the Olave, London, Burks, Pickens tier for me. But he wasn't really there before the season. He's really just proven why he was like the 112 in the first place and why Doubs was the 205 or 206. Like during that stint, did Doubs really ever do anything that showed he should have been? What could you have probably traded him for like a first at some point, you think? Did we get quite that high?
I think so. Well, I think
Maybe not a
so.
first, but like a second and some at some point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the hype
Yeah, I
was
don't
getting
know
to
if
the
he
point
ever
where
earned that.
yeah, because the hype was getting to the point where I mean everybody was trying to like jam him in DFS. I mean everybody was talking about like his target shares, like despite the fact that it didn't matter that he was like out of sync with Aaron Rodgers, unable to haul in some of the deep targets. Just the volume was continually there. So yeah, I would say that for like a 2 to 3 week stretch, like a first probably would have been a bit too extreme, but yeah, I think a second could have definitely been in the range of outcomes for what you could have flipped them for.
And like it's easy to get caught up in the season, so I'm really not knocking anybody for making the decision to prefer Doubs, but you just have to remember that it's dynasty and it's a long, not just a long season, it's a long few seasons, it's long careers for these guys. And when you have a 2 round draft capital difference on guys, it matters a lot. Like the difference between second round and fourth round for wide receiver is massive. And if you thought that Dubs was going to be the outlier, that's fine. There's like a 1 in 100 chance that you could get that right. And if you hit it, you hit it, and fantastic, good on you. But like I would be right the other 99 times. So I just steadfast with Watson, and it's by no means a victory lap because I still have him at the end of the first round. Like I have not moved him up because of his 6 touchdowns. All I'm saying is that he's been clearly a focal point of the offense, and that's kind of what we expected him to do. So he deserved to be in that first round range. Well, I don't think the Dubs ever should have really quite cracked that first round. So I'm assuming you're okay with the ranking of Watson over Dubs.
Yeah, but it's just in the totality of like the wide receiver rankings. I think it's easiest to keep them like towards the back end because thinking
Right.
about what Green Bay, like you were talking about, it's a long season, but also we're trying to project out like how the team is going to view these wide receivers moving forward. And who's to say that let's just look at the depth chart for Green Bay at this point, right? So they got Watson, cool, Doubs, okay, all right, fine. I mean, so they wound up more or less. I wouldn't call them hits in the same way that we consider hits to be, but at least we know that they can wind up using them at some point down the line. But then outside of that, who else do they have right now? I mean,
Right.
Alan Lazard,
Torre.
journeyman,
Yeah.
Randall Cobb, who's only there because of Aaron Rodgers,
Sammy
Sammy
Watkins.
Watkins, yeah,
Yeah.
like Torrey that you mentioned, the 7th rounder. So this is a team that's going to have to continue to cycle through their wide receiver room at this point. So who's to say they don't continually add in like prospects over the next couple of years? Because it ain't always going to be like these guys that are essentially going to be Christian Watson and nobody else.
And by the way,
There's going to be relative talent added to that locker room at some point here soon.
and Doubs was a successful 4th round pick, so I didn't want to come off saying like he was a complete bust. He was definitely a successful 4th round pick for the Packers. He was plenty involved, and he will be involved going forward. He certainly carved out himself some sort of role. It's just that I don't believe that he ever should have been valued over Christian Watson, and I don't believe that he should be going forward. He's still a valuable 4th round pick, and I still think that he moved himself up a few spots into like the 202 range when I had him in like the 206, 207 range. But like you said, who's to say that they don't bring in? I mean, I guess the counter argument to that is that Aaron Rodgers begged for them to bring in wide receiver help for years, and it took him a really long time to even get to Christian Watson. But we don't know what offense we're getting going forward, period, because we don't even know. Like maybe we saw our Aaron Rodgers last game last night. Like we really don't know he's probably not coming back this year. Why would he? And we'll see about next year, but we don't know what their team's going to look like with Jordan Love moving forward either. So it is
Yeah,
safe to keep them both at the back end.
that's kind of the whole point, because if there's no real I guess upside to the offense, although like Jordan Love, I mean, looked good on the limited shots
He
that
did. He
we
was
got him
much
for.
improved from last year for sure.
100%. So it's just, but is that sustainable over an 18-week season? Blah, blah, blah. We can get into that, like if the announcement is made that Rodgers is moving on or whatever. But I think the point still stands that Randall Cobb at this stage of the game, we shouldn't expect him in their long-term plans. Alan Lazard, well, fine, journeyman. What is his like 2 to 3 year outlook? Sammy Watkins, probably gone by the end of December. So it's just there has to be more that's going to be added to them, and we can't expect them to continually fail on wide receiver prospects, because they're not going to continue to draft Equanimous St. Browns, right, or Mari Rogerses they're
Yeah.
going to be just complete failures, and the targets will then be able to condense on other wide receiver options like Lazard, right? Because that's essentially how we got Lazard, because the draft picks that they wound up picking up, they bottomed out. They flamed out, and we wound up getting Alan Lazard like after the fact. So it's like, okay, but is it a situation that should happen again? Theoretically, no. So that's where it's like it's easy for me to look at Christian Watson and say, cool, glad that they've got him, glad that they were able to find a productive receiver. But relative to the other guys that we've discussed so far, from Pickens to Olave to even like Burks in some sense, like I can't put him above those guys.
Sure. And that brings us to the last handful of players to cover. We'll cover them all at the same time because they're relatively similar. We have Dameon Pierce, Rachaad White, and then James Cook. The reason they're relatively similar, even though James Cook hasn't done much while the other two have, is that James Cook was a 2nd-round pick. Big difference between the other guys. So Rachaad White was a 3rd. Dameon Pierce was a 4th. 4th-round running backs are very, very hard to find sustained success with. And Dameon Pierce has done well on his own, independent of his offense. But the Texans appear to be a dumpster fire for a long time going forward. So for many people listening to this podcast the entire time, you're waiting for me to mention Dameon Pierce. In fact, there's probably people that would want Dameon Pierce above maybe probably not Breece Hall, but close. And I don't even think that the conversation should be even close, regardless of how much I love Dameon Pierce and how much I enjoy watching him and think that he is actually a good running back, because Texans are such a difficult team to invest in. And we've seen that has not been successful in like the last 6 years. So why do we think it's going to turn around next year or the year after that? Fortunately, they're going to have a very early draft pick, but they're not a quarterback away. So Dameon Pierce is very hard to invest in. He still finds himself towards the back of the first round, even though he's getting all that volume for me. And then Rachaad White looks to be the probably the best bet of the three. And then James Cook, we just haven't seen enough from. So he finds himself at the end of the running back tier. But how do you rank those three guys?
I think it's probably Dameon Pierce, and then Dameon Pierce, Rachaad White, and then Cook will be probably a decent ways down, just because with Rachaad, with Pierce, it's easy to see that the team was willing to put him like up, like right front and center, like of their offense,
Right.
because
That
we've
is
seen
fair.
that as teams have more or less, I don't want to say sold out to stop the run, but essentially, like if you bottle up Dameon Pierce, you bottle up the entirety of the Texans offense. Just look at how awful they have been from yards per drive, EPA per play, like insert team metric here. And if Pierce can't do anything, like they go the way that Pierce goes. I mean, to coin a phrase or to take a phrase from Jerry Jones, it's like that they can't do anything. So I think from a volumetric standpoint, Pierce is probably the easiest to project moving forward, because with Rachaad White, assuming Brady's there, assuming Fournette continues to stay there and they try and run it back another year, he's stuck this way. Like he's stuck in this timeshare, and he's been fine from a missed tackles forced standpoint, from an explosive run standpoint, from a success rate standpoint, all solid. It's no knock against White as a runner. It's just the timeshare that he finds himself in. Then also the curious part about him not getting targets, I guess it's not as curious if you've got like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, just like Julio Jones, player after like receiving option after receiving option attached to Tom Brady. I get it. But then at the same time, wasn't Rachaad White's calling card coming out of college and like the fact that he was a good receiver? So just the fact that we haven't seen a ton of it, it's just odd. So I think it's easier to say that Dameon Pierce, just because the volume is and should continue to be there as Houston does whatever it's doing to get themselves back on track. Rachaad White probably come in like slightly after that, because the team has shown a willingness to use them even when Fournette was healthy. And then with Cook, it's really just kind of been they've tried to work him in alongside Devin Singletary, but Devin Singletary is serviceable. I won't say he's
And then they
good,
added
bad, or
Naheem
whatever.
Hines to do exactly what Cook should have been doing.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know about the whole Hines thing, because Hines has played special teams. We've seen Cook, like, we've seen him worked in. It's just that I think it's just Devin Singletary keeping either of them at bay.
I don't
Versus,
think there's any there was no reason to trade for Hines if Cook. The only reason to trade for Hines is if it was really all about Zach Moss. And does Zach Moss matter enough for the team to even worry about moving him? So like that could have been why. Like if they just wanted to get rid of Zach Moss and knew that they could get Naheem Hines for it, fine. You like you said, he is a productive special teams player, and that could have been like the main point of it. But I just feel like if James Cook was and he's still young, he has time to become what we think he could be. I mean, Dalvin Cook was a second round pick too, and he didn't come on right away. So there's still time. But I do feel like if James Cook came on as fast as we feel like he should have, the Naheem Hines trade probably doesn't happen.
maybe, I don't know. I think if the Bills are probably looking at it from a long-term standpoint, it's entirely possible that they looked at Zach Moss's contract and was just like, yeah, we're not going to pay this dude anyway. And for what they drafted him as, if they could just dump him and then pick up a guy like Naheem Hines and just kind of,
Sure,
flip-flop the
maybe.
contracts, because Josh Allen ain't getting no
Well, Zach
cheaper.
Moss didn't. Yeah, Zach Moss is what's Zach Moss going to do on special teams? Like maybe make a tackle rather than
Exactly.
Naheem
So it's
Hines, like
like
returning kicks.
So
So
it's like they could
it could
he
have
has
that could
he
have
has
been.
more utility. So he does have more utility to the entirety of the team, not just on offense, but his special teams utility, along with him being used on offense, it gives him more utility. And again, if they weren't if they probably already knew that they weren't gonna keep Zach Moss like for any longer than they have to, and they can offload that rookie contract somewhere else, the Bills just probably looked at it and just like, yeah, well, let's just do that instead of figuring out how we're gonna pay him.
All right. Well, unless you have anything else, that's our trip down memory lane for the 2022 rookie class. Thank you all so much for coming out. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, do all those YouTube things to help us against the YouTube overlords. Remember, check us out on Spotify. We are no longer underneath the Audible feed. We have our own feed on Spotify, and we would love your subscription. That's going to do it for today. We will catch y'all next week.
Peace.